People were shocked that I wanted to become a writer. A woman who had been my high school teacher wrote if you think Ace Atkins is ever going to be a novelist, you're crazy. He's one of the worst students I've ever had. I've written 32 books now.
Today's guest is my dear friend, Ace Atkins. Years ago, Ace sent me a manuscript and told me that he had dreams of following the same path I had as a football player turned author.
The internet is not going to kill the newspaper business. I see a world really filled with a lot of charlatans and hucksters and people who use religion as a mean to get ahead economically and to fool people and control the masses. But
I'm Tim Green and I have ALS, but this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Today's guest is my dear friend Ace Atkins. Years ago, Ace sent me a manuscript and told me that he had dreams of following the same path I had as a football player turned author. Looking back now, with all the books you've written and the amazing writing career you've built, do you remember what you were hoping I would see in that first draft? And would you mind telling that story?
I think, Tim, as you well know, that's a loaded question right there, man. You know, this manuscript that I sent to you, Tim, back in 1993, something like that. I was hoping you would see genius in it. I would have thought you would have seen kind of a Hemingway quality to my writing, and you would have instantly taken it to your editor and said, I've discovered the great new talent. And I don't know if I have it here. I may. Well, no, I think I do. I'm going to show you all the red that came back on this manuscript. This is what I got back in the mail here, and this is just some of the pages here of the mistakes and the rookie stuff that I didn't know. But without that, I would have never been published. And it was a how-to. And I remember the first thing you told me, Tim, is you said, I like your characters and I like your story. You know, let me help you tell it. Let me tell you how to do this. And I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't taken any classes as far as creative writing. And you set me straight. And but it's interesting though, Tim. I think sometimes I've tried to help people and they don't necessarily want my help. They only want to hear that it's great. They don't want to fix it. But I think for us having the football background, nothing really hurts our feelings. Nothing really makes us want to quit. You can say whatever you want to say, and then we want to get it right and make it better. So that's I was hoping you would see genius, but what you saw in it was you saw some promise, and you said I wouldn't do this if I didn't see some promise, and that meant a great deal.
What made you first reach out to my dad, Ace?
I had a friend who was the attorney for the Falcons, and he knew that I was a big Tim Green fan. And he knew that I followed him. And I at Auburn, I actually was number 99, and that was not by accident. You know, I wanted to emulate. I wanted to be like Tim Green when, in college. You know, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a football player. It was my Tim was my hero. And so this guy knew it. It was Chip Allen, and I think he brought a letter, or I was going to send a letter to Tim, and then some way we had crossed paths that Tim saw an article about me in the Atlanta Constitution and wrote me a letter and said, hey, let's get together and talk books and drink some beer sometime. And we just started up correspondence and phone calls, and we've been friends ever since.
Did you keep the one page?
That was good. That was the one page that was decent. I don't know. I think what I did with your idea, which was I like the characters and I like the idea of who these people are, but you've got to find a more complete story. You know, what is your story about? And getting to it quickly. There was a lot of things that were swirling around in the book but I think I started straight over and started working. But there was so much in that manuscript, though, Tim, in the notes that really I pulled out, and things like active voice, um, clarity of not overwriting, keeping things active, um, writing better dialogue. I mean, all really core things that I had not learned were in that corrected version of my manuscript. And honestly, Tim, I don't know anyone I would do that for. There's no way, because I know how much time that takes. There's no way I would take a manuscript unless, it was somebody who was my own relative taking the time to come in and just show exactly what you need to do. But it was a game changer. It really was.
Well, now you have exceeded me as a writer by leaps and bounds. I'm genuinely a huge fan.
I appreciate that. I don't know about that. I think it's something, another good thing that you taught me, which is you get better with every book. And hopefully, with each book, you learn something. And I've written 32 books now. And with each one, it's always like starting again to know what you did wrong on the last one. And I don't necessarily think that a lot of writers think that way, Tim. I think sometimes they want accolades and they want to reflect on what they've done as being perfect. And again, coming back from the athletic background, it's like watching game film. You go back and you look at what you've done and you try to improve on it. So I hope I've improved from that crap that I sent to you back in 1993. It was really nowhere to go but up. So hopefully I've made some strides.
You've made more than just strides, my friend. All right, so Ace, you grew up in Alabama, the son of a football coach, and you went on to play for Auburn's undefeated 93 team. How did that upbringing, the discipline, and the culture shape you as a storyteller?
I think I think playing football, and especially being part of that team in 1993, we had a new coach. It was Terry Bowden, and he really made a big impact on me. And also the guy who was the strength and conditioning coach, Todd Stroud, who now is the defensive line coach at the University of Miami. And what they taught me to do, I think, is to go in and when you are working, to give it your all, not to, I think there's sometimes you hear of a team or whatever, and I had been part of something like that where people would kind of loaf and kind of go half speed and not really focus on what they're doing. It was more about the length of time as opposed to the quality of time. So I think about that all the time when I come into the office. This is a place to work, and when I sit down in front of the computer, I want to be completely focused and give it all my energy. And then when I'm done, it's like getting off the field. I can relax. I can go do other things. I can do that kind of thing. But when I'm here to work, I want to make sure that I am as focused and hit it as hard as I can.
You were on the Sports Illustrated cover after a big Auburn win. What do you remember most about that moment? And does it feel connected in any way to your writing career?
That was a pretty unique thing. It was a special edition cover when Auburn was 11-0, and we were on probation at that time, so we couldn't go any further. After our final game against Alabama, that was it. We were on probation, so no bowls and national championships and that kind of thing. Although I firmly believe we would have been very competitive with that. But we were at our senior watch banquet and in Birmingham, Alabama, and a good friend of mine, Richard Scott, who was a reporter for the Birmingham News. I was sitting up on the dais, and we were talking, and they were breaking up, and they were talking about the unveiling of the Sports Illustrated. I never really gave it any thought. And there was a great picture that somebody had taken during the University of Florida game where I had some big plays and that kind of thing. And he took a picture of me after I had a sack. And it was just a good photo. It's a really good picture. And my buddy Richard Scott looked at me from the out in the crowd and held up the Sports Illustrated, and there was the picture of me sacking Danny Werfel, who went on to win the Heisman Trophy. So I've been tied to that magazine pretty much my whole life. Not necessarily outside the South and not necessarily outside Alabama, but when I'm in Alabama at a book signing, I can't escape signing a few of those Sports Illustrateds. And it goes even further, Tim, as I'm doing an event in Georgia in a couple weeks, and it's an event where they're just talking about different aspects of Southern culture, and so they're bringing different writers in. And they gave me the PR material, and it just says Ace Atkins, former defensive end, Auburn. And I sent them back a message. I said, I've written a few books too. I said, I don't think you want to talk about my limited career, playing in college. I'm sure you could find some better people to do that. I said I might offer a better perspective as a novelist. But yeah, it's a neat thing, and it's been a big part of my life.
That's great. What a fun experience as a young player. Ace, you started out in journalism, even getting nominated for a Pulitzer for an investigative series. What did journalism teach you about building tension and authenticity in your novels?
That's an excellent question, Tim. And that to me, getting into the newsroom after being in college was not necessarily something that I had planned on doing. I had not studied journalism in college. I'd studied screenwriting of all things, and writing TV shows and movies, and I thought that's what I was going to get into. And I really fell into this job and then found out it was the most perfect job for me. I mean, I knew the kind of books that I wanted to write, even from the point of sending you that manuscript, is I wanted to write crime novels. I wanted to write thrillers, and what you talk about, the world of authenticity. I didn't know anything that was authentic outside of what I'd watched on Miami Vice. I didn't know what the real world was like, and covering true stories. But getting into a newsroom, it really reminded me of being part of a football team. And so you're part of a team, you're covering breaking news, you're working very hard every day. You never knew what the day was going to be throwing at you. But I covered murders, kidnappings, bank robberies, um, cold case files, IA files. I covered the courthouse. I did it all, and it was the best training in the world. And for what I ended up writing in the world of a crime novel, and writing about law enforcement, writing about the judicial system, writing about criminals, it was huge. It was a huge thing for me, and I loved every minute of it. It was really the best. And I also had great editors, like great coaches. I was working with some of the best editors at a big city newspaper, the Tampa Tribune, who were not easy on me. I mean, they were tough on me. They'd tell me, it's like you, it's like you when you read my book, is they told me when something was wrong, but they told me how to fix it. And I would go into my editor's office. I was only 23, 24 years old, and we'd sit down in front of the big box of what used to be the editing system. And they would read line by line, and to show me what I had buried down in the story and what I needed to put up faster. And what that taught me was get to the point and clarity of story. And the other thing that it also taught me was by taking notes, of taking quotes of how people really talk, not the way people talk on TV or talk in movies or whatever, but really paying attention to the way people speak in real life. And that gave me an added edge too. But also just the clarity of story. What is our story? What are we trying to tell? Why do we care about this? Why are we writing about this? It was a great training, Tim. It was perfect. It was a perfect thing for me to do.
How do you go from Auburn defensive line to journalism, though? I mean, I know you said screenwriting, but how did you
Troy,
start?
Troy, it's a rocky road, man. It is a rocky road when you get out, and especially there's a certain amount of baggage. I think with your dad, coming out and being valedictorian at Syracuse, and perfect academic record and that kind of stuff. I was not that. I was not. I was a good student at Auburn. I was a good student, but I was certainly not winning any accolades when I got out. So there's a certain amount of baggage that you have being a football player, and I think that even more back then, that people expected you to act in a certain way. People were shocked that I read books. People were shocked that I wanted to become a writer. I even had a woman who had been my high school teacher wrote a very nasty letter to the athletic director at Auburn after I had done an interview talking about wanting to be a novelist someday. She said, "If you think Ace Atkins is ever going to be a novelist, you're crazy. He's one of the worst students I've ever had." But before I even met your dad, that was a huge source of inspiration, which is your dad's message was you can do anything, be whatever you want to be. You can be an athlete, you can be a novelist, you can be a lawyer, you can be a businessman. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be one thing. You can be whatever. You can do all these things. And so I took that message, and it was a huge inspiration to see a writer. Really, I guess the first real football player since Pete Gent, who had a really good career. But getting into the newsroom, I kept on being pegged as a sports guy, and I'd be the sport. They kept on sending me to football games to cover. And after a lifetime of football, that was the last thing that I wanted to do, was spend time at a football game covering stats and stories and all that kind of stuff. And I really had to jockey for position to get the job covering the crime beat, which is what I wanted to do.
You left that secure reporting job at 30 to write novels full time. That's a big leap. What convinced you to take that risk?
Another good question, Tim. Hit the nail on the head. When I left the Tampa Tribune in 2001, I did. I had a good job, and I had been there for a while. I really felt I was really getting better as a reporter. I was getting better at asking questions. I think, though, the thing that made me leave was, at that time, was sheer stupidity, which is leaving a good paying job and having insurance and having a place to go every day to become a novelist. It really was a huge leap of faith, but I didn't question it very much. I really thought I'm going to make it in this business. I wasn't worried that I wouldn't be able to continue to publish or continue to come up with ideas. But what happened when I left, I didn't see happening. I'd like to say that a prophetic idea of what was happening. But when I left, the internet was just starting to come about. And I remember having meetings at the Tampa Tribune where they would say, the internet is not going to kill the newspaper business. The internet is actually going to make the newspaper business better. We're actually going to find more readers by giving our product away for free. And this is going to be the best thing ever for journalism. And only in a very short time, few years after I left, the layoffs started coming. And I'd worked for a newspaper that had been around for a century plus, was one of the mainstays of the Tampa Bay area. And now I've got an old brick that's in my office from when they busted down the building after it folded. So I got out at the right time. I miss it. I wish it was still around. I would love to go back to it. I miss the old days of working, but it was a very long, proud tradition that I was damn lucky to get into at the very end of that time. It was the twilight of the old newspaper days, but it was great. It was some old time stuff. I loved it.
Do you think that, because you said how it was kind of crazy or maybe even dumb to take that chance? Do you think that you kind of had to take it at that age? Like right now, if you had been working in newspaper, even if you had bounced to a different newspaper that stayed in business, I mean, at this point in your life, it seems like you wouldn't have been able to take a risk like that. Is that something you had to do at that age?
I don't think so. There were a lot of factors. I think that the business had changed a lot. I had been used to working with some really amazing editors. And what they were trying to do at this period of time was really combine the world of television and print and online. And so the way that I was used to working, which was like like a old tough newsroom, coming in and working with these editors who'd been around. I mean, I worked with one guy. He had been there since World War II. He started as a copy boy. Another guy I worked with had covered the Kennedy White House and the space program, and so that culture started to lose its foothold in journalism and at the paper. But I don't necessarily. I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think it was a good thing. I sometimes wish I'd stayed around for at least a couple more years because I loved it so much. Even though the new stuff was aggravating me, how it was changing the culture of the newsroom. I loved going to work every day. I mean, we work with the craziest people in the newsroom. I mean, it's just a rogues gallery of all kinds of people from all over the place. And you've got the movie critic sat behind me, and the courtroom reporter is next to me, and then over on the other side there's the sports guys, and it's fun. It was a wonderful place to be. But I think in retrospect I probably got out about a year or two early. I didn't necessarily have to do that. I think it was I'm glad I did. It was a sink or swim, and I had to learn how to swim and do it very quickly.
This led to arguably your most famous character, Nick Travers. The Nick Travers series were steeped in blues and Southern culture. Where did that character come from, and what part of you is in him?
Tim, another right spot on. I think when you first start writing, and I don't know, Tim, if you had this experience with ruffians, I imagine that you did. There's certain characters in your novels that were really, I knew there was a lot of you in them. I think there's a lot of me in Nick Travers. I think that was kind of my idealized self. I'm a big music fan. I love blues music. I collect old records. I love history of Southern culture. I love stories about the bluesmen from the 30s on the way up to the 1960s. And so, Nick Travers lives in New Orleans, and he's an ex-football player, played for the Saints. And so he's kind of like me, dialed up to 11. I was a good college football player, but, Nick played for the Saints for a while. I was teaching, in the world of, I taught for a little bit in college, but Nick is really the best at teaching blues history. And of course, he has a great place to live in New Orleans. He lives in an old warehouse. And so it was kind of more of I would say, Tim, more of my aspirational self. It was really idealized what I wanted to do. But it's funny though, for me anyway, for me, and I think you had the same experience because you started writing books that had women as protagonists. You started writing, I think more diverse characters as you went on. As I got older, I was less and less interested about writing with me as the star or me in the book. I really like writing about characters now who are completely different from me. And that's usually the criteria when I'm sitting down and writing a book is I like writing people who are I don't want to be in the story. I want to be the person outside telling all these kind of interesting characters. So I'm always looking for characters. And I think that's how I've maybe matured a little bit as a writer.
You've got a gift for blending real history with fiction. Some of my favorites were White Shadow, Devil's Garden, and Infamous. What's the key to honoring the truth while telling a gripping story?
I think what I wanted to do with those books is I wrote those four books that you mentioned are true events. They are things that happened. There are historical records of them. In the case of a book like White Shadow, again, kind of getting to be an older reporter, writing about things that are not about, my world, but things that had happened and trying to recreate it. So what I tried to do as a novelist was really bring that time to life and to bring those historical figures, to bring them back to life and represent them as accurately as possible. But what happens when you're taking true crime and turning it into a novel is it really looks like a jigsaw puzzle that hasn't been finished. So by the time I finished with my research, something like the Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle scandal of 1921, which I'd love to say was a huge bestseller, but I think there was a limited amount of people that wanted to read about the a murder trial from a silent film comedian. But I was fascinated by it. I loved reading everything about it. I loved reading the old newspapers. But what I was left was an incomplete jigsaw puzzle. And it was like I had to plug in those pieces of what I did not know. So I tried to honor the truth as much as I could. But as a novelist, I had to fill in those holes to make it work as a book. But anywhere that I could tell the truth, I tried to do it. And I think that all of them are a fair representation of what happened. I mean, one of the nicest things I had is in Wicked City, which was about a political assassination that happened in Alabama. I got to know that the son of the victim. And he said he really thought out of all the books written about the time of Phoenix City, Alabama in the 50s, he said that mine, he had been there as well, really brought it to life. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be as true as I could to the people and events that I was writing about.
I also have to ask about the Quinn Coulson series. It feels like a modern day Southern noir with a moral center. How did Quinn take shape in your mind? And did you always know it would span so many books?
So the Quinn Coulson books, I think it's interesting. We're talking about that outside Phoenix City, and Phoenix City being this sin city of Alabama in the deep South, where there was all kinds of illegal activity happening, from bootlegging to murder to prostitution, whatever. That really inspired me to do something contemporary, and it was not. Um, it made an impression on me when my editor at the time, Neil Nyren, wanted me to write something, but he said, I want you to write something contemporary. And I had had so much fun writing about this sin town in Alabama and Wicked City. I thought, what would this look like in the modern day South? And in the South where I live, in Oxford, Mississippi, maybe somewhere around here. And so I created a fictional county, Tibahaw County, Mississippi. I needed, as you mentioned, a moral center. So it's not straight out. Sometimes my books get called noir, but I really, in true noir, there's not much of a moral center. It's usually people trying to crawl their way out of the gutter or trying to escape some pretty awful situations. But in that, I just had the simple idea of a soldier returning home from war. I mean, it's a story as old as the Odyssey, and finding his whole county that he left 10 years ago when he had joined the military after high school, overrun by corruption, greed. His uncle had been the sheriff of this county, and he had died under mysterious circumstances. And the other part of your question, did I ever think it would run so long? I mean, there's 11 books in the series, but there's no shortage of those tales to tell. I can find more stories about Tibahaw County in Mississippi just by looking in the news today. There's always something happening. There's always corruption. There's always murder. There's always hidden secrets. There's always, the South is steeped in those kind of stories. So I hopefully will write more. I had a lot of fun with that world, and it gave me a broad canvas to work.
Ace, when you got inspired to be an author, but you started off obviously, and you said in college you wanted to write TV shows. Did you ever write like the story that inspired you? Like, did you like when you originally said, I'm going to go down this path, or maybe for you it was a TV show?
Yeah.
Like, was the TV show, was that the Quinn Coulson series, or did you ever like take that challenge on of kind of trying to bring your original inspiration to life?
I think the original inspiration was Nick Travers and writing those stories about New Orleans. And I remember being a kid and going to New Orleans with my family and wandering around. And I just came up with this character in this world. And that was really the original thing that brought me to actually sit in front of at the time, just notebooks, but later taking those notebooks and then learning how to type. And back then you actually had to have an old typewriter and working on those stories. But it was really the city of New Orleans. It was blues music. It was jazz. It was the feeling of that world that inspired me to write something down that was that inspirational to me. And I think that was really just being around the city itself.
The setting in those books almost becomes its own character. How do you capture the Deep South without romanticizing or stereotyping it?
It's a good, it's a world of contradictions. And was born in the Deep South. I was born in Alabama. My family is deeply Southern, but I lived in a lot of different places. My dad worked in the NFL for 30 plus years as a player and a coach, as a scout. So growing up, we lived all over the place. We, lived in Detroit when he was coaching for the Lions, and the 49ers when he was coaching, and then later became a scout there. And so we lived. So it gives me, I think, a unique perspective, which is, I come to it as an insider, but I also can approach it in a more clinical way, where I don't necessarily have to romanticize it. I don't necessarily like that kind of Southern writing. I don't like the moonlight and magnolias and the genteel Southern, all the cliches or whatever, like anywhere. I mean, there's gritty stories in upstate New York. There's gritty stories in New England. There's And so I'm drawn to the realism, and that's what I try to recreate. And I think anytime that I want to get focused, I have a buddy of mine when I was writing the Quinn Coulson books, who was a sheriff in the county south of where I live in Calhoun County, and I would just go and he's a great guy named Greg Pollen, and Sheriff Pollen and I would just drive and I would just listen, and he would tell stories about his day and talk about things that were going on and tell me about some of the incidences that he would have to get involved in and some of the court things and the investigations. And so I try to get as close to the source as possible. And I think that's that's why I'm not writing about, you know, hound dogs and whiskey and all that stuff that comes in with the South, which is really to me just the most uninteresting part of the South. There are things about here I could tell you. I'm right here on the Oxford Square. I could look out my window and this is beautiful, beautiful historic square. There's some wonderful things and wonderful people, but there's also a lot of terrible things, a lot of terrible people. And so I like to write about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Being chosen to continue the Spenser series is like being handed the keys to a classic car. How did you balance keeping Parker's voice alive while making the stories your own?
That was something that happened, oh gosh, around 2010. And my editor at the time without me knowing it, it was known after Robert B. Parker passed away that the family wanted to continue the best-selling series. They knew that readers still wanted to follow these characters like Jesse Stone and Spenser, the private investigator in Boston. And I love these books. Tim knows it. He knows that before I ever got this job, I was a huge, huge Robert Parker fan, and I was reading these books since I was in high school. And so when I was tasked of continuing the books, I didn't necessarily want to put my own stamp on it. What I really wanted to do was capture the feel and the essence of what people loved about those stories. And I don't mean just the characters themselves. I've seen that happen with other series where you have, you're reading about a character like James Bond, but it's written very much in the style of the author who took over that thing. I really wanted to create something that would have been Parker's next book. What would he have written? What's the next story that he would have told? And it was almost like being I probably really overthought this, but really almost like writing in another character, in another voice. So I tried to write the books because Spenser is written in first person. It's written from Parker's voice. I tried to approach writing those books the way that Parker would. I use words that I would never use in my own work or my own life. There were things that necessarily I wouldn't do structurally in a Quinn Coulson book, but I did it because that's the way Parker would do it. So I really wanted to continue the flavor of those books and the feel of them. And I didn't want to be in the way. I wanted people to say to me, which was the highest compliment, I couldn't tell you wrote this book. It read like a Parker book. And a lot of times people would say that to me kind of in I'm sorry to say this, I don't know if you want to hear, but I can't tell the difference between you and Parker. And I said, no, that's the best compliment I can get. I don't want anyone. I don't want you to say this is an Ace Atkins book with Spenser in it. I want you to say this is a good Spenser book.
When they chose you for that, I mean, being a fan from for so long, was that like an emotional moment?
It was. I mean, I think the first thing I did is I called Tim and told him that I had gotten this job. And he knew how much personally it meant to me. He knew what a huge fan I was of these books and how seriously I took the job. I didn't want to just, crank some stuff out and put that on. Every book that I wrote, 10 of those books, and I did it with a lot of care. But yeah, it was a really, it was a real honor. And I think there are going to be other writers writing Spenser for the next few hundred years, probably. But to be able to be the first to take it on and take the baton after Parker did it. And then also the time was great I got to fall in with some wonderful people who treated me so well, including Bob's wife, Joan, who welcomed me to Boston. That was not a town at that time that I knew very well at all. And now I feel like I can walk Boston blindfolded. I know every corner of it. I love Boston. Met so many friends up there. A lot of people from Bob Parker's inner circle that became some of my closest friends. So it was a very, very cool, and I was very honored by it.
Did you ever feel the weight of the fans' expectations, and how did you deal with that pressure?
So I had an interesting experience, Tim, with that. Um, when it was announced that the Spenser series, I mean, these books would come out, we're talking about from 1973, 1974, not always annually, but at the end, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there was a new Spenser book every year. So the publisher Putnam announced that, don't worry, Spenser fans, Joan Parker has hired, this writer Ace Atkins to continue on the Spenser books, and they're going to be coming in. So I think when that happened that day, I put it on my Facebook or page or whatever, and I just got lit up with both positive comments and negative comments. Who the hell is this guy? Especially being a writer, who's not from Boston. How hiring a writer from the South, primarily known for writing Southern books. But the funny thing happened is when that was announced, in that story, it was let known that Parker had one other book left to be published. It was a book called Six Kill, and Bob's book Six Kill still would be the next book coming out. But some way in the story, when that book came out, people assumed that I wrote this book Six Kill, which Parker wrote every word. I mean, he was in the can for 6 months before he passed away. I mean, it was done. It was one of his finished books. And I got more nasty messages about that book. Said, if you think you can write about like Robert Parker, you are sadly mistaken. This was so awful. This sounded nothing like Robert. I mean, I'm just talking about like dozens of this. How could you dishonor the memory of Robert Parker with this terrible book and all this stuff? Anyway, what I really came to philosophically, Tim, as far as the pressure, was if Robert Parker cannot carry off being Robert Parker, then I'm going to get criticism for it for whatever I do, no matter how close and how good the books are. And so I didn't really worry about that anymore. But in the end, I mean, after the first book was published that I did, Lullaby, I would say that really overwhelmingly the response was really positive, and people love these characters so much. And I think they saw that I wasn't just some ghost writer, some hack that they had brought in just to fill out the pages or whatever. They realized I was a serious novelist that wanted to pay honor and respect to this guy. So once they saw that, and the real fans were terrific. They were really great. I was sad, I think some of them were sad to see me retire from doing that. But after 10 years, it was a great job. But as you get to be older and you've written a lot of books, you really, no matter what I do, Tim, no matter what I'm writing those books are never mine. They're always something that I do where I'm truly Spenser for hire, where I write those books and then I give it to the Parker estate. And so I have to work on my own stories. And that's kind of what it came to.
What did the family think? That's the only critics I cared about. What did the family say after they read the book?
The family was great. It was really Joan Parker, who was really Bob's first line editor. When he would write every day, they had a beautiful house in Cambridge, this gorgeous old Victorian, and they had it outfitted famously where she lived upstairs and he lived downstairs. And I'm talking about completely different living quarters. They had separate kitchens. They had separate, everything. It was like two different apartments. And that's how they figured out to really make their marriage work, to have them separate. And when Bob would finish in his office, he would finish 7, 8 pages and he'd leave them on the steps. And then Joan would give notes and they would talk about it. And that's the way he worked. And so really the core of that was Joan, his longtime editor, who'd been with editor for him for many years, a woman named Chris Pepe, who was wonderful, his longtime agent, this woman, Helen Brand. And they were unanimous. I don't know if there were other, I think there were other people who were trying to do this and reached out. And I'm sure that they got other pages from other people. But it was funny with Joan. Joan would always make the joke when we do these speaking events, is she said, I just couldn't figure out, she goes, I've been in the Boston literary scene for for 40 years. And she said, I never heard of Ace Atkins. Who's this guy? How could he be in Boston? And I never heard of him. And they had to break it to him. They said, well, he's not, doesn't live in Boston. He's from Mississippi. So that was what she liked to tell the story when we would do that stuff. But they saw what I did, and they saw how much love I had for this character and what I did. And Joan was just, she was wonderful. She was a force of nature.
I'm not surprised. That must have been so fun. Ace, Don't Let the Devil Ride was called one of your most ambitious novels yet. What made it different for you creatively?
It was a chance, I think, Tim, in writing Don't Let the Devil Ride, why it felt larger was after doing 11 books with Quinn Coulson, which was great. And as you know, I've always really been into reading series, and I really wanted to develop a long running series. And then doing Spenser and turning around and writing, Mississippi, and then turning around writing about Boston. Um, After doing that for 10 books and then 11 books, I had asked my question, if I did not have the constraints of returning to the same world and that same series, what would I do? What is the book that I would write just for pure enjoyment? If I was starting over again, what would I do? And so I realized that writing about rural Mississippi, you're writing about a single county. And I've always said that a single county, you can find, intrigue, danger, hidden secrets, all kinds of stuff just within a small rural county. But for me, writing about that was not any different than taking on this book, Don't Let the Devil Ride, which takes place in Paris and London and Dubai, and there's international intrigue. It wasn't hard for me as far as a writer. I mean, it was the same. I could write about, Memphis or North Mississippi in the same kind of way, but I think it felt bigger because geographically it was bigger. I think it was a story that I think a lot of people could relate to, which was a woman after 15 years of marriage, having two kids. Um, Her husband goes missing on a business trip, and in trying to find her husband, she finds out he's just an absolute fraud. And the business where he supposedly works, there's no one in the office. She finds out people that were supposedly employees of the husband, don't even know who he is. And so she's left with the question of not where is my husband, but who is my husband? And so that was a lot of fun. And so it's really a comedy at the heart. I mean, that's really what I hope people come away with. It's not what I call a run and gasp book where people are shooting and crying and all that kind of stuff. It's really, and that's something I learned from Parker. I mean, when you'd read a Spenser book, I got some really great laughs out of reading Spenser. At the heart of it, it would always have a lot of humor in it. And so for me, I think if anything, I'm dialing into the humor a little bit more.
Your book that just came out in December, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, sounds like a mix of Southern noir and international thriller. Can you give us a hint of what readers should expect?
This is a book, Tim, and especially from you with your connection to Atlanta and living in Atlanta, you'll appreciate. Um, when I was a kid in the mid 80s, we lived out in the suburbs of Atlanta. And so when I would watch shows like Stranger Things, I would, or go back into an original show, something like The Goonies or whatever, reminded me really a lot of growing up. It reminded me of, you know, BMX bikes and watching MTV and, the music of that period with Dire Straits and Prince. And it was a real formative time for me. And I think 1985 in particular was a very crazy year in pop culture. I mean, the Back to the Future came out, the Live Aid concert was there, but also politically it was nuts too. I mean, this is when things were starting to kind of change a lot in the Soviet Union. This is the first time, Reagan met with this new guy that nobody knew anything about named Mikhail Gorbachev. And that was a huge deal of Gorbachev and Reagan meeting at a summit in Geneva in November of 1985. And then you had movies like Rocky IV, or you had all this Cold War angst, and then that's what I thought when I was 14 or 15. You thought Soviet spies were all around us. You thought, you know, is nuclear war, is that going to happen? And we were all so paranoid, and we didn't really know a lot about the Soviet Union. We were always very curious about it. So my story begins with a kid that would be about my age in suburban Atlanta. Um, his mother is single, and she starts dating this guy. And this 14-year-old kid believes this man that his mother is dating is actually a KGB assassin. And so that's what starts off. And everything in the book is true. And the way a lot of how my life is. In fact, I end up putting put a few of my childhood friends from that period in Atlanta. They're in it. The places are exactly how I remember it in the 80s, like Lenox Square, where I'm sure you spent a lot of time, Tim, at Lenox Square, and the restaurants like the Varsity. And Atlanta was really kind of at an evolving, emerging time. I mean, it was I think the biggest building at the time probably was or one of the most impressive buildings was the old Hyatt, which was has that crazy atrium that is a architectural wonder. And so I really incorporated places that I knew of that time period. And as that kid, Troy, you asked a question much earlier, which was what was one of the formative stories? Did I ever do anything to it? I think that I never put these stories down on the paper because I wouldn't even known how to do it. But as a kid, 13, 14 years old, when I was at a shopping mall in Atlanta or somewhere, I was always looking for, imagining KGB spies were around us. I imagined somebody was doing a dead drop in the middle of the shopping mall. I imagined somebody walking out of Rich's department store with their red bags, maybe had secret government plans in there. So those were just, Walter Mitty fantasies that I had. So in some ways, it's like returning back to my original story. So and it's funny. Years later, there's a wonderful guy named Frank Figliuzzi, who is a terrific person. He's on MSNBC and he's on CNN frequently as a contributor. He used to be the #2 guy at counterintelligence of the FBI, and Frank was a young agent in Atlanta at that time period in the 80s. And he's very serious about what he can tell me and can't tell me. So he's told me a few stories, but I just said, Frank, can you confirm, were there Russian assets and Russian spies working in Atlanta in the 80s? And he said, absolutely. He said that Atlanta was a city that was covered in spies. And you think about it, Lockheed is there. There's other military, there are other firms there that make hardware for the Defense Department. And also it's kind of strategically, it's not close from like the submarine base outside Savannah. So he said there was always a reason for these KGB agents to come through Atlanta, and often the cover was that they were taking their family to Disney World. And when they would run into the FBI agents, they'd always say, you can take a plane, you don't have to drive. And there was always the joke that the Soviets loved to drive, but it was because they were meeting their contacts and they were meeting the people who were working in Atlanta and gathering intelligence. And so, yeah, it was a fun time. It was, like I said, very pivotal time for me. 1985, I think, in pop culture and in my life, and was a really kind of a joy to return to.
What does a typical writing day look like for you on your farm in Mississippi?
Well, I'm not at my farm anymore, Tim. I'm actually for the last several years I've taken an office here in downtown Oxford. So I'm in an office building that shares space with attorneys and day traders and all kinds of people. So I have an office here. I don't know if you can kind of see it, but it's a very small little place where I come in, and it gives me a focused place to work. And so for the last, almost 10 years, I haven't worked outside my home. I've come downtown, and makes me want to, get out of my pajamas and shave and get dressed and get to work and treat it like a workspace. And then part of that is what has worked very effectively for me is to keep focused on I think most people think that being a novelist is just a job where you sit around and pontificate and talk about things and maybe write a little bit, but it's hard work. As you know, Tim, meeting deadlines, coming up with story ideas, I don't think there was ever a time when you and I would talk about books that, I mean, right when you were about to turn in a new book, you were already thinking about the new book. That book you're finishing out that one book, you're on to the next one. And so that's what I try to do is, it's a job, and there's some days are great. Some days are just like, I can't believe I'm being paid for this. I've got my coffee, I'm sitting down and I'm working and telling stories. And then there's some days where it's frustrating as hell. And, you want to take your laptop and throw it out the window. But having a good place to return to and work is very helpful.
Do you only write there? Will you write it if you get like a moment of inspiration? Will you work at home, or you only write in the office?
I will occasionally work at home. I've got back porch where I occasionally will sit out and smoke a cigar and drink coffee and work on some stuff. But if I need to, there's sometimes where I get a little bit claustrophobic here, and I might go down to the coffee shop and put on headphones and work there. I think that wherever I'm motivated is the perfect place to write. So I'm not superstitious. No, I mean, it's not like I can only write in this room, but I prefer writing here. But I like coffee shops too. I've written a lot of novels, sitting around coffee shops. I think there's something about occasionally in an office, it can be almost too quiet. And when it's too quiet, I'm used to the newsroom with people all around you and talking and all kinds of stuff, that I miss that kind of buzz of activity. It kind of makes me motivated and kind of gets me energized. So I'll do that. But working in my office is preferred.
Yeah, I like writing in new locations too. It can bring new inspiration, sometimes even subconsciously. You've now written more than 30 novels. How do you keep your creative engine running without burning out?
I think, keeping my creative engine going and coming up with new ideas. I think I'm always, just like, I learned this from you, Tim, is because, we would talk in story, kind of think out stories a lot. I mean, you and I, we did that a lot, talking about ideas for books and coming up with new things. It's just exciting. It's fun. It's fun. It's not, it doesn't seem like work. I mean, we just sit around and spitball about ideas and come up with crazy ideas about stories and come up with stuff. I think, I think the key is only coming up with ideas and books that I want to write and that I'm interested in, even, going back to the true crime stuff we were talking about, where it was a murder trial from the 1920s. I mean, I spent hours upon hours looking at microfilm and contacting the Department of California records to find autopsy reports and all this stuff. But it was fascinating to me. It was interesting to me. And then something like writing Quinn Coulson, I really love people who lived in that county. I love the characters in that world. So that kept me motivated to return to them and to write about them. And so I know writers sometimes will come to something because they think that it is something there that people will want for business purposes, or they think that it's going to sell, or they think this one's going to work. But after doing this for a long time, the only thing that gets me going every day and returning to the computer is writing about things that I am enjoying, and I write people that I enjoy. I write situations that I'm into, characters that fascinate me. And that's what keeps things interesting.
When you think about your career as a whole, what do you hope your legacy will be in the world of crime fiction?
I hope, I really, as far as, the books that I leave on the shelf, I hope the best ones are yet to come. And that's what I'm excited about, is I think that it's taken me a really long time, I think, to, write books the kind of books that I wanted to write that were inspired by others. But I think that after doing this for, over 30 years now, is now finally developing a style and a point of view that's uniquely my own. So I think, you go back to the books like the Nick Travers books, or, have certainly a huge influence with Robert Parker. And I think like the Quinn Coulson books have a huge influence of Elmore Leonard. But it takes a long time to kind of develop, specifically, I don't want to write books that are like other books or adjacent to other books. I really want the new books to be firmly rooted in being unique. And so that's what I hope, Tim, is I hope that, that my past books are certainly enjoyed, and I hope they're appreciated, and I hope um, people will, even Parker fans will go back to the Spenser books and continue to know that I had that love and appreciation. But mainly, with like Don't Let the Devil Ride and Everybody Wants to Rule the World, I don't think there's anything really like them, and that's kind of where I wanted to be as a writer for some time.
Ace, do you have a story that you said, you and my dad, and I've been, this is back in the day now, my dad would be driving, we'd be driving to some sporting event or driving somewhere, and you two would be on the phone. I would just be sitting there listening, whether it's because we were going somewhere for me or because I got in trouble and my punishment was I had to go tag along with my dad for a couple of days. I don't know which one, but there was like, is that, I guess, is that like the most fun part of writing? Do you like the kind of coming up with the idea to start writing, or do you like when you're in the middle of it? Like what part of the process is your favorite?
I think the part of the process probably is what you're talking about is and I don't really have anyone like your dad he's the only one that really, I think we work so much in sync, hopefully very quick thinkers coming with ideas and spitballing and coming up with crazy stuff. And that's the fun for me. It really is coming up with these worlds, and then honing them and developing them. I think that your dad told me one time, he said, it's like, you know, building a house. He said, you have these ideas for a house. And he said, all of a sudden, you might have an idea. Once you get that gelled, you can't throw away your blueprint in the middle of building a house. And he said, then I think he used to use the term like a jacuzzi in your kitchen. As much as a jacuzzi is really nice, you don't want your jacuzzi in your kitchen. Keep focused on that world you come up with. So I think laying the groundwork, the original stuff where you're coming up with that blueprint, you're coming up with those plans, and you're coming up with that idea, that's the fun of it, because you don't have any constraints on you. You can come up with whatever you want to. And we've, Tim and I have had so much fun coming up with some ideas, and probably some outrageous, crazy ideas that should never be on the page, but they gave us a good laugh. Just very inappropriate stuff that, there's no way a publisher would publish it, but we used to come, oh my gosh, some funny stuff, really funny.
And in that kind of same vein, do you have a story that, or I'll use the analogy you guys would go with. Do you have a blueprint that you haven't built yet? Do you have a house that, like a story idea that you want to do and haven't gotten to it yet, whether it's because you're not ready for it or you haven't finished the building plans?
I always keep kind of in my back pocket. It's kind of like what you used to have back in the old days when you used to get movies from Netflix and they used to have to send you the Netflix physical copies. You had a queue of your backlog of what was next you're going to be, looking at, what you wanted to watch next. So you'd have a queue. So I always have a queue working, and sometimes that might change. There might be a time where I'm working and I feel like this book is going to be next or that project's going to be next. And then sometimes by the time I roll back to them, I don't have interest in them anymore. But I try to keep a list of about 4 to 5 different projects that seem like good ideas, and sometimes they're not. I mean, there's one idea that I've had for quite some time, and when I circle back to it, it's 5 years later, and it's not as interesting to me anymore. And then something will hit you that just the other day something came to me about an idea that was just nuts, and it kind of moved up to the number one on my queue. That may be the next thing, but I try to keep focused. I mean, again, something else. That Tim and I always talk about, which is, when you start the project, you see it through. I don't think, Tim, you had many projects that were abandoned. I don't remember you like saying, I'm starting a novel and I got, to page 50 and I'm not writing it anymore. You never did that. You always would see it through. And it's kind of like a road trip. You start off with a road trip and you're with your buddies, we're having a great time, and then halfway through the trip, you want to kill these people and throw them out of your car, but you got to get onto your destination and you got to see it through. And so if I take on a project, it's something I'm happy about being on this. I know that being on a road trip with these people is going to be worth the effort.
The road trip analogy is hilarious. And you're right, I almost never bailed on a book. Ace, has religion played a meaningful role in your life? I ask without judgment. But I've personally found so much stability and comfort in my religious resurgence. So I find it so interesting to ask.
You and I have talked about this before on different occasions, and I think what gives me hope and gives me interest in any type of faith is watching other people live it with great conviction, and people who really show strength in adversity, and people who show a lot of moral toughness, and those people continue to inspire me. And people like you, Tim, when I hear people that are men or women of faith that come to it with conviction, I think we're living in a strange time where there's a lot of negative to contend with. And I think for me, I see a world really filled with a lot of charlatans and hucksters, and people who use religion as not only a shield, but as a mean to get ahead economically, and to fool people and control the masses. But I'm still not jaded enough that I don't find interest and respect of people of true faith and of true conviction. So when I hear that, and I hear those stories, or I see people who live it, I'm always willing and very happy to listen.
At the end of each podcast, I ask our guests to brag about their families. For you, this is especially sweet because I adore your crew. Please brag away.
I am very proud. I've got a wonderful family here. We've been here for 25 years. Today's actually, it's hard for me to believe, and I'm sure it's crazy for you, Tim, now having grandchildren. But my oldest son turns 18 today, which is just amazing. He is a great student. He runs track. He is a endlessly curious, very funny kid. My son Billy, my son Jess just turned 14. He's also in high school. He loves books. He's a reader. He actually does competitive fencing, loves movies and storytelling. And so I'm very happy. And then my wife, Angela, who I met, as you know, Tim, 25 years ago on the crime beat. She was a fellow crime beat reporter working for the other newspaper. And I ended up chatting her up at a crime scene and talking to her. And then eventually we ended up, getting married and spending our lives together. So I'm very, very fortunate in that capacity. And the other thing I'll brag away about my wife is she is an editor without a filter, Tim. There's no backpedaling when she reads my work as another writer to tell me where I make mistakes or where I lose her as a reader. And then that goes back, also connecting back to you, Tim, of that's really, I think, your best friends in life, and the people that really have your back are not necessarily the ones that tell you what you want to hear, or just coddle you. The ones that are deeply honest with you and want you to do your best. And so I certainly had that with my wife, and I certainly had that with good friends.
Ace, if there's any single guys out there, should they be going to crime scenes to try to find their love of their life?
I don't recommend that. That was definitely a one-time thing. But yeah, I would actually look for. So a lot of times as a reporter, it's funny. You didn't necessarily have to go out to certain crime scenes. Sometimes they were kind of low stakes. They weren't necessarily a murder or a kidnapping or whatever. Sometimes it was just a fire. It would be a house fire or something. You didn't necessarily have to go out. But when I first met my wife, I took every opportunity I could to go every single crime scene I could in hopes to run into her. So it worked out for me.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
I think, have to go with kids being born, your children being born. That has to be it.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
I think that one of the toughest things I think was being in college, and my father passed away while I was in college, and it was very unexpected. It was not he was working for the 49ers, and he was on a business trip, and he was a hell of a lot older than I am now, and so I was only 21 years old, and then I remember that day having to continue on playing football and continuing on going to practice and all that kind of stuff. So I think that, having that at an early age and dealing with that was something that um, uh, was for me. I'm, you know, glad I made it through that time.
What are you most excited about?
I am excited in the future of hopefully doing more work, as Tim and I have talked about for years, of doing more work, bringing my characters and my world to television and film. And that's something I'm really committed to in the next few years, of spending a lot of my time and energy. And it's something that I've always wanted to do, but I haven't necessarily been focused on doing. And I think now, from writing 2 books a year now to writing, 1 book a year, and that kind of thing, allows me to open up and do a little bit more, with hopefully bringing my world or even other characters working in that business. So I'm excited about doing you know more for TV and movies.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Don't be a writer. What would I give myself? Don't take everything so seriously. And I think that that's something, it's taken me a long time to kind of, even though, with business and writing and that kind of stuff has its ups and downs, but is it really the most important thing in the world? It's something I enjoy doing, but I think that advice I would give my younger self is, enjoy enjoy your moments and enjoy the small stuff, because that's the most important stuff in the world. And the stuff that I get most pleasure out of, or the most pleasure I get, is spending time with my family, or going on trips, or just those things. And I think I was, as Tim knows, a very ambitious young man, a very ambitious writer. But just the process and the journey of itself is to enjoy that, and not, even though you're looking ahead to new projects, enjoy what you're working on, enjoy that time with your family, and that to me is something that always needs a constant reminder to put things in a reality check.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
I always, I have to go plug some of Tim's books, and I can't. I think it was ended up being. I always call this book called The Third Rule, but it's. I think it was published under Exact Revenge. That book to me still would make such a damn good movie. I mean, it's just such a great action. I still see the sequences with the snowmobiles and the casinos on the Canadian border, and this retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo. And so that's probably my favorite book of yours, Tim, and so much fun. It'd be a great TV series. It'd be wonderful. I am a big fan of, just recently gone back and reading my old friend Elmore Leonard, who I got to know. Very fortunate to have spent time with him. He is one of the absolute masters. So I'm going back and rereading some of his work from the 80s. I also go back, the originator of many modern thrillers, is a British writer named Eric Ambler, and I'm going back and reading his early novels that were set before World War II, and they're filled with all kinds of things that are very, the emergence of fascism, and alliances being torn apart, and very timely stuff. And these books could be, I think, highly contemporary books. And he's a wonderful writer. And then one of my, James Lee Burke, I always go back to one of the absolute living masters, Kate Atkinson, another British writer. I've been reading a lot of British stuff lately. And then my friend Megan Abbott has a new book out, which is wonderful, called El Dorado Drive.
I make fun of my dad. He always watches. There's a thing you can subscribe to. It's like Netflix. It's called BritBox.
Oh, I have it. I know BritBox. I love it.
I should have known
No,
the two of you would have the
yes.
BritBox going.
Oh, BritBox. I love it. Yeah. Great show on there. If you haven't seen, Tim, if you haven't seen Case Histories, which is from the Kate Atkinson novels with the character named Jackson Brody, I think it's on BritBox and it's terrific. And then there's a new show on right now um, that's set in the UK, but it's actually from a Norwegian, some Norwegian crime novels, and it's called Department Q. And I think you would love it. It's fantastic. Fantastic. One of the best shows I've seen in a long time.
It's good timing because he was just saying he's looking for a show.
Yeah, Department Q. And also Slow Horses. If you don't watch Slow Horses, that show is, I think, I think Gary Oldman is the greatest actor of, living actor today. He's wonderful. So Slow Horses, those two shows. I was sad to see Department Q end, but Slow Horses has about 5 seasons.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I would say the one thing that I wanted to say before I get off this thing, because I haven't seen Tim in person for a long time, is Tim, I love you. You are one of my favorite all-time people. And I would have never been published. I would have accomplished half of the things, not even close to, without you being my mentor. And so that's what I cannot say enough. So thanks, Tim, for everything.
Ace, before we let you go, I got to ask, at the end of every episode, we ask our guests, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should try to get on the podcast and kind of tell their story?
That's a very good question. I'll have to think about that one. I'm not sure. I don't know if I know anyone deserving enough in my world. I know a lot of seedy characters. I'm not sure anyone. Let me think about that. Let's put a pin in that. I'll come back. I'll be thinking of some people that are interesting enough to be on the show.
Deal. Ace, thanks so much for coming on. It was great having you.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks, Tim. I hope to see you in person very soon, my friend.
Ace, this has been such a pleasure, not only to hear your insights about writing and storytelling, but to share this moment as friends who've been on this journey together from the very start. I'm grateful for your time, for your perspective, and most of all, for your friendship. It is always so good to talk with you, brother. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope God continues to bless you and your family.
Thanks, Tim, and back at you, my friend. Back at you. Great seeing you, and I want to see you in person very soon.
Let's make it happen.
You got it. You know where to find me, guys. Thank you.